I'm Gerard Whateley. Thanks for listening to the podcast. In this episode, the welfare check on the Bulldog Nation. 2 days out from the preliminary final, the man at the helm, Coach Luke Beveridge. We probed the mind of Blighty, ran Strategy 2021 with Craig Jennings, and checked in with Daisy Pearce in Perth quarantine, plus Federal Sports Minister, Senator Richard Colbeck. You can get in touch at any time. Whateley at sen.com.au. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Good morning. Coming up at 10, Western Bulldogs coach Luke Beveridge. Epic road trips, thrilling finishes, a sense of deja vu, and an injured captain. Can the Dogs march into Adelaide and claim a place in the Western Grand Final? Yesterday we checked in with the Demon Nation. I wonder how the Bulldogs Nation is approaching Saturday night. 0433 98 11 16. The last time the Bulldogs were in the preliminary final, it's just about the best game I've ever seen. The pilgrimage to Sydney, the sheer brutality of the contest, the epic nature of the final quarter, and the rich sense of fate. So as a little heart starter for the Bulldog Nation to stir the memories and prick a few emotions, we surfed around on YouTube and thought we'd take you to this.
This is all tough and rugged stuff. Dunkley fixed to feel the heat. Joe Hannison a blur, charging away, bouncing like the game's on the line. Identifies Bontempelli. Bontempelli, the future star, the present star, steady. Listen to the Bulldogs fans.
Bontempelli, no one between he and the goal. Paddles it up, gets back onto his left foot to hit the front. The Dogs are in front by a point. Bontempelli has brought them to their feet.
The long ball down to Bontempelli. Bontempelli runs in, lines it up and kicks a goal.
He's got the Bont, half forward, big play. They trail by 5. He gathers 40, 30, 20, goal. Dogs lead.
Matthew Boyd hacked it out of midair and Joe Hannison backed himself. He's away. He opened the field up. He'll kick it for Bontempelli. He loads after it. It's all his. The Bont. He looks. He steadies. He goes. It means the world to the Bulldogs.
What is that stir in your Bulldog Nation? We're in the crowd that night. 0433 98 11 16. Your coach Luke Beveridge joins me at 10. So a bit of Hutto from SEN. Brian Taylor on Channel 7. Rex Hunt on AFL Live. So the forerunner to AFL Nation and Wayne Swass on Triple M. An iconic Bulldog moment. Oh, that stirs preliminary finals in you. 0433 98 11 16. A little check-in with the Bulldog Nation today ahead of Luke Beveridge at 10. Thursdays means Strategy with Craig Jennings. Daisy Pearce is in quarantine in Perth. And a beautiful place, the mind of Blighty, especially so ahead of the prelims. We're stirring some Bulldog preliminary final memories and setting you up to hear from Luke Beveridge at 10 o'clock. As a Sydney-based Dogs fan, it is one of the few occasions we got to see them. I've never been as nervous in my life. When JJ broke free and gave it to Bont, the rise and roar has only been rivals at the stadium next door when Cathy won and when John Aloisi hit that famous penalty. It was a roar of over 50 years of pressure being released. I will never forget it. Sam from Padstow. I was there, never felt anything like it. Pure euphoria. Catherine in Bacchus Marsh. G'day, Gerard. Glenn in Oceanside, California. Bont's prelim goal was about 5 a.m. Friday morning here, and the yells, scream I let loose probably woke up the entire state. I was shaking for hours. Booked my flight back to Melbourne, and wowee, what a week. Go Dogs. Cheers, mate. Gerard watched the prelim at home and was jumping for joy whilst my 7-year-old was amused by her father jumping around like I just won the lotto. Don't write off the Dogs. They've beaten Port in Adelaide this season. Watch the masterclass Bevo brings. I was there. One of the best days of my life. Shared it with my 18-year-old son at the time. I screamed. I cried. I was in disbelief. I couldn't believe that we had actually made it into a grand final and I was going to see it. And so was my 93-year-old dad. The grand final would be the last game he ever saw. He ticked the last thing off his bucket list and said, I'm out of here. The most amazing month, and don't think anything will top it, not even if we do it this year. Love my Bulldogs. I was in the crowd for the prelim, admittedly cheering on the Giants. As the siren was about to sound, I remember turning around and seeing at least a half a dozen Bulldogs supporters in the level above crying with jubilation. It was in that moment that I was so happy for Doggies fans and couldn't do anything but clap at the result. A great memory, well-deserved win, and the best of luck this weekend. That's from Lee in Canberra. Paul's in Langwarrin. Welcome to you, Paul.
G'day, Jared. How are you?
I'm well. Were you there?
I certainly was, Jared, and I'm actually shaking now, still thinking about it. It's bringing back memories. But, the greatest game that I've attended, I had my 18-year-old daughter with me as well, and it's the only time we've actually travelled interstate to see the Dogs play. So it felt like a home game from an away game for us. But just a message to Bevo as well, if you got him on. We just want to let you know, from the Bulldogs Army point of view, we know that the team will find a way. And it's not just a team on the field, it's a team off the field. It's a team behind the team. And we feel every tackle, every smother, every block, every lead, every shepherd, every touchline, everything they do. We love what they do. So we know they'll give their best. And whatever Blighty says about Port, we understand his point of view, but he's wrong this time. So we just want to say, go Dogs, and thanks very much.
Terrific, Paul. Thanks for sharing that with us. Epic road trips, thrilling finishes, a sense of deja vu and an injured captain. The question of the morning is, can the Bulldogs march into Adelaide and claim a place in the Western Grand Final? Let's go to the man who's at the helm of the mission, Western Bulldogs coach Luke Beveridge. Luke, welcome back to SEN.
Hi, Jared. Thanks for having me.
So before we look forward, can we look back for a little bit? I am curious, does a coach get a chance to watch the last quarter to savour at all of what happened on Saturday night, or is it all business and transactional at this time of year?
Oh, we definitely get to watch it more in review than anything. We've been rehearsing some end of game scenarios too, and this game gave us an opportunity to do that all over again. And so in the pressure and the heat of the situation, you can look at what maybe you got right and a couple of things you could have done better. Yeah, and so it's more of a clinical microscope, and probably I think we're extremely relieved, as I said after the game. You know, such a tight game and a point the difference at the end. We're well and truly aware that it could have gone either way, and we're really grateful to still be in the series.
Cruel and beautiful was the most perfect description that you did offer. In the maelstrom of it, there are so many little things. Like, I've ended up making 6 pages of notes watching it back, a trap here and a tap there and a knock on and a tackle, just all the little things that amount to, I guess, the big things at the end. How much do you feel like the players did right in the heat of it all?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of the circumstances highlights the really minute margins in it. When Daniel Rich played on from full back and kicked it straight up the middle near the end of the game, ideally we've got someone on the mark who can really pressure that kick a bit quicker and it doesn't go as deep as it did. But as Ryan Gardner's positioning himself to spoil that ball back towards our goal, and he was marking Harris Andrews at the time, Tim English had made really good position. He was in the middle of the ground, and as he goes up to punch it and Ryan comes up behind him, it just nicks Tim English's knuckle, which means it nicked Ryan Gardner's knuckle, and then it allowed that ball to be surged forward into the one-on-one of Taylor Duray and Charlie Cameron. So you look at that and you think, what did we get right here? And we got a lot right, but that tiny, minute element of what happened, could have brought us all undone.
Got it to drive you mad how infinitesimal, almost imperceptible the margins are in all of these things.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So when it's Duray versus Charlie Cameron in real time, can you remember the body flex? Can you remember what ran through you?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we had our hands full in that first quarter with Charlie, and everyone who's playing the game or watches it acknowledges that he's definitely one of the quickest players, if not the quickest player in the game. And he's very Cyril-like in that he's agile. He can slow and ski pretty quickly as much as he can run the straight line. And the reason for the change, really, after he got a hold of us a little bit early, was Taylor. Surprisingly enough, I think he's got quicker as he's got older, and I think just recognising that he's the quickest player in our back end, we felt we'd make the change just in case those isolated moments happened again throughout the course. So he is very diligent, his attention to detail with his positioning is second to none, Taylor. So I wasn't surprised he was in good position. And then I probably felt that his physicality and his physical control of Cameron might have been a little bit more forceful than it was at the time. But I think he probably didn't hit him as hard as he usually would because he was so paranoid about losing his own feet.
Yes.
So he played it quite well, and sending it out to the boundary line was obviously a great result. But yeah, we were holding our breath. There's no doubt in the box.
And Bailey Smith took our breath away with some of what he did in the last quarter. So there's been plenty of evidence across 3 years of his journey so far as the player that he's capable of. How significant as a quarter is that when you stamp yourself in a do or die final?
It's extremely. I mean, as we saw, the impact that he had. Baz is one of the better speed endurance athletes in the competition, and the planets aligned for us a little bit in that we needed to, I think as you're aware, we needed to make some changes with our ruck situation with the dominance of McInerney. And I might say with that, we're really, Lewis Youngie, we've asked him to come up against some big men and just provide a contest, try to stabilise it for us over the past, three games. And by and large, especially the elimination final, we did a really good job with it against Draper. But we were unstable. Our midfield were out of kilter. McInerney's ability to hit it to the outside and dominate set and bounce was concerning. And so we needed to make a change. And the most significant part of that was to probably sit Youngie down for most of the last quarter and just use him for when Tim came off the ground. And that meant that you need to challenge a couple of players to spend more time in that last quarter out in the ground, and Baz was one of those because of his athletic profile. And it meant that he was a bit forward and a little bit midfield, but he was probably playing forward a little bit more than usual because of that time required. And he was just outstanding. And to be able to finish on the left under those circumstances was a testament to how much practice and time he's put into his skills. So really wrapped for him and obviously what he did for our team and our club and our supporters.
Luke, even as neutral observers, it was easy to get swept up in, and the emotion of it is, what's the emotion worth at this time of year? And you've lived this journey once before, and we'll get to that soon enough. Do you want to feel it and let it fully soak in and harness it? What can that be worth as a final series progresses?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to that. There's the now and what it means for our challenge ahead against Port Adelaide, but it's also beyond this year as well. And there's a lot of pundits and commentary, or pundits talking about and commentary around, our history and is it happening again? To many of these boys, that history isn't so relevant because it's new and fresh for them. So for them to experience victory under pressure, we put ourselves under pressure at the end of the year. Stating the bleeding obvious, we lost our top 2 spot, let alone our top 4 spot. And to be able to weather that pressure storm externally and internally, the pressure we put on ourselves, it means a lot for us, right now, because it probably just relieves, the pressure valve is just let out a fraction. So it allows you to play with that little bit of freedom that maybe you hadn't had because you tightened up a fraction. And so for the now, I think it's really important because our method and our planning and what we wanted to achieve this year needed to go north quite dramatically. And the outcomes of our games, our attacking aggregate, our defensive aggregate, and that differential has looked really strong, most of the year compared to what we'd established previously. So, we've got a really good baseline. We've got a terrific platform of belief in what we can do together to work from. And that combined with the recent experiences just provides a great stimulus to play, impactful finals footy. So we're really looking forward to the challenge of Saturday night.
So this is a road trip like a club has never embarked on in a final series. So you've already Tasmania, Queensland, you're Western Australia. You've got to go to South Australia to play the game, and then you'll be hoping you're back in Perth. What do you make of it in real time as you live it? Given Eastonwood told us a couple of nights ago, some of it has been comical with what you had to go through with quarantine protocols and the like.
Yeah, and I won't go into that detail. I think it's been, played over and again. But I think the comical word and being able to make light of it has been so important. And I think the understanding of, what everyone's going through in life at the moment, with lockdown and the effect that this pandemic is having on people. And trying to take positives out of a challenging situation has been our mantra. And there's a real strength in being together and being away and unifying and coming together, for the common goal. And we've really been able to work well from that. I'd hate to think that gets tired. It can't get tired now. We're just so in the thick of it. And so I think across the year, with all of our interstate travel and, the sort of quarantine or isolation aspect of it, we've been able to really focus on the positives and draw on what we can do for each other. And that's the human element. This game is so much about emotion and doing things for each other. Perhaps what is a perceived disadvantage for us is really an advantage. And I, sometimes think that way. And the challenges that some of the individuals have being away from family and, but with the promise of being united again at some point soon, I think everyone's been able to handle that and manage that extremely well.
Luca, in the challenges that present now, obviously the eyes of the football world are on Marcus Bontempelli. You've got your main training session today. How do you go about making a decision as to whether the skipper's in good enough shape to play by Saturday night? Yeah,
I think it always comes down to the prospect and that hypothetical of, is there a big, there's a probability high that you'll lose that player early in the game and have to replace him if he plays, if there is any risk of injury. And usually that's associated with soft tissue injury more than anything. If a player's maybe coming back what is perceived as a week early or... but with things like joints and some soreness, some bone bruising, some things that a player may be able to overcome, and the soft tissue aspect isn't there, then it gives you a level of confidence that they're going to be able to play the 4 quarters. So, we'll see how he trains today and how he goes about his work, and we're really hopeful that he's going to be okay. And if he isn't, then we're just going to have to, as we have all year, we're going to have to spread the load and fulfil his role with someone else, and believe we can get the job done. But yeah, he's an amazing player and leader, and it'd be a huge loss if he doesn't come up.
How much of it comes down to a conversation between coach and captain, do you think, or do the medics play a much bigger role than that?
Now that'll be part of it. The medics obviously have the say. It definitely, I would never. I pretty much just listen and accept what the diagnosis is and what the prognosis is around return. And I'm mindful of our, Chris Bell's position and all our supporting medical staff and the responsibility they have. And I'll never ever question that. And but I do. It doesn't mean I don't have a conversation with the player about how they're feeling and their confidence levels about playing the game. So, Marcus and I have already touched base around that and how he's feeling, and there'll definitely be another conversation today about how he's going and his confidence levels in his performance proposition on Saturday night.
Are you more optimistic now than, say, you would have been on Saturday night?
I don't think I've ever really wavered. I think with the Mecca, what actually happened with him, and he being stepped on and the twist, and I was hoping that, he was going to be okay anyway. I saw him walking around after the game. It gave me a level of confidence. It didn't seem to be a really big limp. When the scans came back and there wasn't anything dramatic wrong with his knee, obviously we all breathed a sigh of relief. But yeah, I'm probably more glass half full now than I was, when it happened.
On the Cody Waitman front, obviously he won't play. His 6 quarters of finals have been excellent so far. How big, for a young player, how big a loss is he to your setup?
Yeah, he's a big loss. And I think when you consider that Brisbane sent Starcevic to him, who's their number one lockdown player. Starcevic went to Latham Vandermeer in Ballarat earlier in the year, which is a credit to Latham and his form at the time. We really rate Starcevic's game and what he does as a negating backman. And so, Porter got similar types, and it means that someone else gets the attention as well. We thought Cody was managing that extremely well on Saturday night against Brisbane. And, the way he plays the game, as I mentioned after the game, with his aerial and his ground level play, he's a real handful. And but as I mentioned with Marcus, we've had players, whether it's Anthony Scott, whether it's Lockie McNeil, whether it's Mitch Wallace, Jason Johannesson, all these guys that have just come in and played critical roles throughout the course of the year. We'll need to spread that load. And I think both teams will be subtly different to when we've played each other throughout the year, and those subtle differences can be quite significant. So, and Cody didn't play against them last time because he had a concussion. But we'll see how we go.
Luke, I don't mean to ask you the question you've been asked every week, but I did see that there was a hint that Steph Martin was back in the mix to return. So is there a chance that he is going to play?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I don't know how and where that comes from.
Yeah.
Because week to week, my take on Steph's, the proposition of us playing Steph has probably been pretty consistent.
Yes.
And all along, what I've said is he's missed a lot of football. The match conditioning aspect is not going to be there. And if he's fully fit, then, we've got to really work through what that means at the time. And I suppose week to week, you're hoping that your ruck situation, all we're trying to do is stabilise it, as you know, because it was quite stable at the start of the year with Steph and Tim duelling through there. And it's by no means stabilised right at this point in time. So if he trains, and he trains strongly, he had a session in Launceston with the boys while we were away in Brisbane, and he trained strongly. There's a consideration, absolutely, as there has been every other week. But I'm not sure how there's a proactive take that he's likely to play, because that wouldn't have come from our quarters, and it's probably just maybe an assumption on how difficult it was for us on Saturday night with what went on, and it's probably it's justified that we'd probably be thinking that we need something different, but the Steph Martin proposition doesn't really change to what it was, over the last sort of month and a half.
Yep. So last time you met, and the beauty of these prelims is both sets just met in round 23. You led until the last 5 minutes, had the last kick which lands on the goal lines, tipped through for a behind. Is there a lot in that game for you, Luke, to work with?
Yeah, I think so. Georgiades played that day and came off with his hamstring, and Fantasia didn't play. So that's probably that subtle change that I'm talking about, and how Port go with that forward line, and whether or not it is Georgiades or they stick with that extra small. And we felt, we were 2.5 goals up with 8.5 minutes to play. So there's something in that. We did a lot right for parts of the game, and we're on edge with others. And I think our forwards did a good job for most of the day of being able to score when we should have. But I think both sides probably missed some opportunities, and they definitely did after we jumped them. So there's some the fact that we beat them in Adelaide earlier in the year. We're not coming to this game as a team that won't absolutely believe that we should be both even money if we're talking about the betting odds.
Yeah. My memory of it, Luca, is that you had really good plans around Aaliyah. Is that the reality? Did you feel like you negotiated him for the most part pretty well?
Yeah, I think our forward, that's probably one of the aspects of what our forwards did really well. And we were tall down. We felt we had Shaq was actually the sub in that game, and we undernarred over whether or not we'd play the extra tall. He was coming back, so. And for it to be that one less, it meant that Tim and Norts in particular, and Mitch Hannon needed to be really diligent in their positioning and what they did. And so, yeah, we felt definitely going into the elimination final, we needed that extra tall for balance. And the fact that Shaq had been able to establish he could play a little bit down back as well gave us the confidence in him to play him up forward. And if we needed to switch him, we could. And so he's been a really important role player the last couple of weeks. And, he'll obviously stay in the team. So we'll look a little bit different with our profile that maybe Port Adelaide haven't seen. The time we played them earlier in the year, they lost Cleary early in the game to injury, and we lost Easton Wood. But Cleary was one of their three key defenders, so it meant that it evened up the height factor in our forward line, and Norts and Brucey were able to give really strong contests that day. So, we've sort of stabilised a little bit. Brucey's still a huge out for us, but I think the boys are doing a tremendous job with in his absence.
Yeah. Preliminary finals are special, and the best game of footy I've seen and had the privilege to call was the last time you were in a prelim. There was a great sense of pilgrimage in that as your Bulldogs fans moved their way around the country and then ultimately at the MCG. You're disconnected from that this time, and we've been talking about that in Melbourne. Yesterday we spoke about it with Demons fans who are disconnected from it. Can you harness any sense of the Bulldog Nation, as it were, or are you a little travelling posse on their own through this final series?
I think you can. I mean, there's been some great videos of the Bulldogs faithful and their jubilation and their emotions and some of the private messages to our people, in particular our players, and some of, I think, our media crew are doing an extraordinary job on some of the social media platforms and what we're seeing. And I think the players can eat that up and feel the emotion. Obviously, the crowd factor is a bit different when Brisbane was a very parochial Brisbane Lions crowd, but I think that's our players have actually just been looking forward to playing in front of a crowd, and whether it's quite pro the opposition or not, it hasn't really concerned them too much. They're just enjoying hearing the noise, the theatre, the Coliseum aspect of it all. They've really enjoyed. So I think we can definitely leverage off some of the emotion we're feeling, and even the joy of our staff. I was on a Zoom meeting with our administration earlier in the week, and they all had the Doggies colours on, and they're just small things keeping people going, and their contributions off the field, as I'm sure all the admin and executive staff have contributed to their clubs. But I love the fact that our people are getting a real lift from it, and our families in particular. So definitely can feel it, and I think it adds a little something to it. There's no doubt about that.
Luke, always appreciate your time. Thanks very much, and good luck. Good luck for this time in Perth and the trip across for Saturday night.
Thanks, Jared. Appreciate it, mate.
Legend of the game, Malcolm Blight. Hello, Blighty.
Good morning, Jared. Yes, preliminary final weekend. Wow. Most people love this weekend, don't they?
You?
Yeah. Funny enough, people might not remember this, but prior to 1994, there was only one preliminary final, and you had to go through the repechage system, and two teams got there, and one was already waiting for you in the grand final. So in '94, of course, I was coaching at Geelong, and we had the hand of fate, or God, as they called it at the time, the Gary Ablett one-handed mark from Lee Tudor's kick from the pocket to actually beat North Melbourne after the siren virtually, so to qualify for the grand final. So that was the first time that was 2 preliminary finals.
Shall we? Let's delve a little bit in 94 and 97 with you, Blighty. So what are your... 94's been on high rote on Fox Footy all week. What are your memories of it?
Well, I think the most... I used to try and trick myself. I mean, this sounds funny from the coach's box, but I tried not to look at the scoreboard too many times. And, you know, as a player, I remember when I was first coaching back in Adelaide at Woodville, who were, they won one game, so they weren't very good. So I tried to take the scoreboard out of the equation. So you play every minute of the game as though it's the last minute. In other words, go flat out from go to woe as best you can. So as a coach, sometimes, I tried to do that myself so that I actually wouldn't get caught up in, oh, no, we've got to do something. So, you actually think clearer and rationally, I reckon, without the scoreboard, if you think about it, and that's what I tried to trick myself with that a lot.
What sticks in your mind? So when you watch it back, John Barnes takes the huge mark at fullback, and actually Toby Bairstow was on with Bob and Andy a couple of nights ago, and he hand passes the ball straight to him. And go, what the hell are you doing that for? And he has to slap the kick onto the boot. What do you remember about the frenzied last 90 seconds?
Well, I probably remember the end result. You had probably the best kick in the competition with a shot at goal after the siren. So, I do remember that little left foot kick back from Tudor. I thought that was brilliant. Just perfectly weighted. Almost an unspoken star, isn't he, with that sort of kick? A lot of players can't do that, so that was just brilliant. And then Gary to do the one-hander. Mick Martin played some sort of game on him that day, the North Melbourne fullback. Like Gary didn't do a whole lot, but, geez, I was very thankful he was there then.
And so the discipline of Tudor to do that, I guess a bit of this week has been about choosing the right thing in the right moment, and that might be as good as there is.
I think it was. There's always those sorts of moments in lots of games. Blokes do very good stuff. And I remember in the second quarter when Melbourne played here in Adelaide against Brisbane, Clayton Oliver did 3 of the best kicks you've ever seen to forward line players. Just offside kicks, little ones, let him run into. He changed the game. The art of kicking and the art of doing the right thing with the footy. Now, maybe it's a handball, but I always find that kicking is much more damaging and dangerous if you can get it right. And that's why he's become a really good player. He could always get the ball. I can see a lot of players get the ball, but the guys that actually make those beautiful decisions, and you know why? It's usually your brain's not racing. It's just under total control. You're in total control of your body and your mechanisms in your body.
Okay, so 3 years later, you're the Crows coach, and this one, so we've put smiles on the Bulldogs' faces this morning. That this one doesn't. This one is a thorn in the side, but you come from 22 points down at three-quarter time. What comes to mind when 97 is mentioned?
Tony Liberatore.
Yes.
With the almost goal. Obviously, the goal umpire's right there. He called what he saw. It's been interesting, isn't it? Every Bulldogs player I thought I've spoken to said, no, I thought it was a goal. And every Adelaide Crows player said, no, it was a point. It was one of those, wasn't it? But the goal umpire, I'll give him his due. He was in perfect position to make the call, and he'd made a million of those in his sporting life. So I went with the goal umpire that particular time.
What did you go with at three-quarter time when you'd kicked 8-15 and trailing by 22 points?
It's interesting, isn't it? I could clearly remember what I said at that stage. It was about, look, why don't we just try and win the quarter? Let's not do any heroics. We don't have to do any heroics. Just let's win the quarter on the scoreboard. Funny enough, I talked about scoreboard.
Yep.
But it is. That's just, sometimes it's as simple as that. Blokes are trying to get a kick. They're playing on someone, the whole swirl of the game's going on. So sometimes you see blokes look at the coaches, and I'm sure they're not listening. I tried to listen every time I played. I really did.
Yep.
But there's some blokes just go off with the pixies, So to actually try and simplify it and just say, look, let's not do anything heroics, because I'd seen a couple of players do that when I coached at Geelong. So we don't need to do that. All we need to do is just keep playing the game playing the game with some energy still, but let's just win this quarter. If the scoreboard's right at the end, that'll be great. If not, let's win the quarter. Let's finish on a good note. You know what I mean? That's pretty simple.
So how did it happen? How did you get over the top?
Usually really good players played really well. I mean, it sounds silly, but, you know, the more I watch, the more I've been involved in football, if your senior or good players just perform at their level, they drag a lot of other players with them. I mean, we always look down the bottom of the list and say, look, they're not the A graders and all that sort of stuff, and it's true, and they can do their little bit, but it's really the top end of town. If they play well, you have a look at the best players in big wins, and usually it'll be 5 out of 6 of them. They're really good players, 4 out of 6. So the majority of goods have got to play really well. How they do that, they do their thing. Sometimes you can help them through it by moving them or saying something good about them or doing something else. But that's all you can do as a coach. The good ones have got to come to the town.
I don't know if you're sentimental about your footy journey at all, Blighty, but do those 2 days hold a special place in your heart?
Oh, look, they do. One of the things, I remember you asking me last year, I think I was involved in 11 preliminary finals because prior to 94, of course, even playing at North Melbourne, we had to go through the repechage, as I call them. So we never went straight into a grand final. So it was always, you know, much harder work. So I've been involved in 9 wins and 2 losses, I think, from memory. So it's a pretty good strike rate. So, but the joy, I can tell you now, the joy after it, both as a player and a coach, is enormous because you know what the taste is like if you've been there before, what a grand final week's like. If you haven't, well, it's just a joy to behold anyhow because it's eyes wide open.
Yeah.
But it is a joy to win a preliminary final because you know you've got a chance. That's all you ask for. That's all these teams can ask for. These 4 teams playing on the weekend, they've got a chance to play in the grand final. In Perth, doesn't matter where it is. As I said to you, you could put it in the rocky suburbs of Alice Springs and it wouldn't matter, you know?
Yep. The mind of Blighty on a Thursday. Let's work through the 4 coaches, shall we? And their journey either across the years or just within this season. So Simon Goodwin, then there were a few coaches under as much pressure coming into the year as Goodwin. He's been to a preliminary final once. It was a totally different trip. It was heavy on the Cinderella run of a team coming from the lower reaches of the 8, harnessing momentum, and they got absolutely mauled in Perth. It's different now. He takes this team into this prelim as the best in the comp.
Yeah, and you know, and his experiences for all that will stand him in good stead. And I mean, he's got a coaching group around him now, and you know, I mean, I sit back in wonder and think that was the young 19-year-old starring in the 97 grand final for the Adelaide Crows and swapping in the middle of the ground with the great Darren Jarman. He was 19 and probably in the third quarter changed the game as much as anybody. So in that game, so he's always had that bend. He was never. One of the interesting things about his playing career, he was a good cricketer and footballer, and he gradually moved into football. And so what he's done, even with his playing career, he developed every year, you know, so that he ended up captaining best and first when all Australian. So it was like a little slow burn, if you like, to become a very, very good player and Hall of Fame member. I think his coaching's probably like that as well. He sort of takes, he's quite methodical in his thought processes. And I'm just watching him from afar now. It looks as though he's doing the same thing with his coaching career. So it's been a joy to actually watch him develop that as well.
How do you approach this if you're Goodwin? Is their game is in great order, and they will feel there's a sense of timing to this.
Yeah, I mean, if you do normally what you've been doing, perhaps with a fraction more. I mean, I heard that Chris Fagan talk about, you know, they were probably all the coaching staff, they were a little bit intense in that first final for Brisbane. You know, they tried to up the ante. I think you up the ante in the way of voice and enthusiasm, not actually in approach, if you understand what I mean by that. You know, you can actually, as a coach, you can get far too serious. And sometimes that just, you know, the tension shows in your body. And I reckon players pick it up. But if you actually get up with morale rather than intensity, and there's a hell of a difference.
Chris Scott, so he's at a preliminary final for the 7th time. He's had 2 wins and 4 losses thus far.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously very, very experienced. He's already got the premiership under the belt. Geelong, had this unbelievable run, seems like, for the last 30 years almost. The most winningest team in the AFL's history. Hawthorn have won more flags. But so, he understands what he's got to do. Is Dangerfield fit? Can they get that midfield going? Looks as though they've got a real quality older midfield now, with Guthrie and Duncan, obviously Dangerfield and Selwood. I mean, they're the guys that won't win the game. I mean, they'll contribute, but they're the guys that will be the barometer. If they can play well, and he knows what they're capable of, and we all do, they're going to be right in this hunt.
What's experience worth to them against the team trying to overcome the historic burden?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, we're all great believers. We love the history of the game, but what actually happened last week has no effect on this week in a certain way. What happened last game they played, that team, the irony of all this, those teams never play against each other again. It's very rarely will you see someone playing exactly the same 22 or 3, even 6 weeks later, 4 weeks later, 2 weeks later. So the dynamics of the teams changes only marginally, but they never play against each other with that exact team.
Ken Hinkley, so he's been to 2 prelims, both narrow defeats, and both against the great teams of the age, Hawthorn and Richmond, and he's got the burn of last year from the final 6 or 7 minutes when they played it in a frenzy and just couldn't compose themselves to try to pinch it.
Yeah, well, of course, I coached Ken as well, so it's been interesting watching his development and with the Gold Coast Suns and a little short stint at St Kilda. So I've actually followed his coaching progress. He's actually been his strike rate's pretty good actually, and his win ratio is very good. Not as good as Chris Scott, of course, but for a team that was actually dead set bottom virtually and destitute when he took it over, he's done a remarkable job. And the recruiting that they've done this year with both Aaliyah and Fantasia has been excellent. And Ollie Wines, those blokes in the middle, I mean, they're really seriously good players. So, yeah, I mean, this is their chance. They've got an unusual list. They've got these 10 or 12, 30-year-olds, whatever, and they've got these great group of 4 or 5 really young players. There's not a whole lot in the middle there. So it's an unusual list, and their probably time is right now as well, right alongside. Melbourne can go for a bit longer. I think we all know Geelong are probably in as we call it, the window, or someone called it the window, and that's probably right. But Port have got this strange mix of players that really should win now or next.
And Luke Beveridge, so he's harnessed this journey once before in 2016. It is a substantially different side, but he knows that it can be done, and there's no one quite like Beveridge to be able to conjure a mission, a story around it.
No, that's true, isn't it? I mean, I've probably, I hate to say this, and I'm respectfully, obviously, and we all do, but he's a bit old-fashioned like that, isn't he?
Yes,
he's not frightened to try. He's not frightened to try stuff, which I kind of entertain and like. We just keep doing the same way and get better at it. But I actually think sometimes as a coach, you need to help a player or a team get through that little hump they get through. So he probably does things slightly different to the rest, which is, as I said, I find perfect for my situation and what I think.
What can momentum be worth in a final series? You lived this in 1994.
Oh yeah, it was amazing, really. 3 of the best finals wins of all time. Yeah, it doesn't mean you get there in the end, but what it does, you mean you get to the grand final. So that's what these 4 teams are fighting for, that momentum going into a grand final, which is not to be sneezed at. Look, who knows? Who knows what it's going to head for these 4 teams? They're deserved. Have they been the best 4 teams? They probably were for the year, weren't they? When you think back now, the top 4 roughly,
yeah,
the best 4.
I think so. The Dogs lived the season above the Lions, and they only changed places in round 23. Yeah. So for 22 weeks, they were higher on the ladder.
Yeah, and the trick, of course, is, I mean, we all talk about Richmond's great era, which obviously just finished, but still might be keep going. But they won 3 premierships from 3rd spot. The year they finished on top of the ladder, they missed out. So once again, the perfection is get into that top four and then give yourself the best chance. And these four teams have actually done that virtually.
We're in the mind of Blighty on the eve of the preliminary finals. Luke Beveridge is going to join me after 10 o'clock. This week's AFL record features an interview with Blighty chatting about his Brownlow and Magarey medals as well. So pick that up, grab the digital edition. If you're lucky enough to be able to be at one of these games, grab it on the way in. Questions for Blighty. Peter's in Essendon. Peter, fire away.
Good morning, Malcolm. Malcolm, with your coach's hat, please. Now, it's all documented that Geelong mustn't sort of bomb in the ball because of the main and lever factor. Now, Blighty, do you think they'll try and sort of run it inside the 50?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, obviously, going forward is the trick of the game, isn't it? If they can find those great forwards they've got. One of the things with those sort of players that actually peel off, I just don't know why people don't do it more often, is I actually would play them from behind. Actually put them on someone, put someone on them, but play them from behind. So these blokes read the ball from behind their opponents or well off them. So if you actually play behind them, it actually throws confusion because they actually haven't had anyone do it for ages. So this would be the great day for me to do that. Play those great readers in the air by themselves, get someone to play on them, maybe sacrifice a little bit, but remember, we talk about role playing. Sometimes you've got to do something slightly different to get across the line, and I'll try that for a start off. Don't let the you get in front. Get behind, and sometimes by actually just waltzing around with them and taking it takes their mind off the game. What's this bloke doing? I'm not doing what I want to do. So it actually takes those good players sometimes away from their concentration.
Peter, thank you. Paul's in Rosanna. Paul, what do you got?
Hello, Malcolm. I'm a Bulldogs member. You've been very bullish about the Bulldogs all year. I'm just hoping you stick with us one more or this week as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I say that? I mean, I'm wrapped at you there. This is as good as you can possibly do now. I've been bullish that they would make the top four, and I think I always put a clarification on that. Trying to pick a premier in March is pretty tough.
Yes.
Who's going to? It's just hard work. I think they've done remarkably well. Can I just say, I think if there's a thing called luck in footy, and there is, everyone needs an ounce of it. It hasn't fallen their way with a couple of injuries. Obviously we know Bond. He's not going to be 100%. Hopefully he plays well because he's going to be one of those guys that I mentioned before. If your good players aren't playing really well, you can't win. So, and he's their very best. So hopefully I've got my fingers crossed for him. They've had to muck around with their forward line a bit with some injuries. Wakeman out. I made a comment. I think Wakeman out has cost them 2 goals. Now that sounds funny. What does that mean? Well, because he tricks them in the air. He's a very good mark, and he can also get a ball on the ground. So they're very hard to find. And 2 goals in a final, I know he might give one away and he might get an easy one, but you've got to find 2 goals from somewhere. And if you're kicking 12 or 13 goals, someone's got to come up and step up to the plate. So sadly, it just hasn't fallen their way. But, as I mentioned earlier, I think Luke Beveridge, he puts his thinking cap on and comes up with something. So hopefully I'll be looking forward to him doing something.
Terrific, Paul. Thank you. Chris in Bateman's Bay, Blighty's text through. What does the weight of expectation and pressure do to Melbourne? Do the other 3 teams have a mental advantage in this regard?
I think if Simon remembers anything about lots of things is stay in your cocoon. Now, what I mean by that is, because they've got a perfect opportunity just to be amongst themselves. It's probably a really good year for this to happen to them, by actually, doing something different, and, you haven't got all the black slappers on your back. But I always talked about trying to put players in the cocoon. So your safety was in your teammates. Stay with your teammates, talk to your teammates, get to know them. And out on the footy ground, that's what you do, is you actually play. They're your football mates right now. So I think the cocoon factor is helping Simon Goodwin and the Melbourne Football Club.
Who are your winners, Blighty? Who plays in the grand final?
Right, for all those Bulldog supporters that I've been hot on all year, I'm picking Port Adelaide.
Jumped off.
It jumped off. I just for all those reasons, and I mean, it'll be a great game, and it'd be a great win if the Bulldogs win. And I'd clap as loud as anybody. But they've got some odds against them. Port don't have an injury. I mean, they haven't even got a Band-Aid. No one's got a Band-Aid on at Port Adelaide. And Melbourne's a bit the same, haven't they? They've got a couple, but not really. They're going to pick their very best team, whereas the Bulldogs and Geelong, yeah, I mean, I'm going with Melbourne really because of the form. Geelong have found their way into another Premier final, and you admire them for it. But if I'm looking on dead set form, Melbourne and Port Adelaide for the grand final. But I've been wrong before,
Not often, bloody, not often. Terrific. It's a great time to probe the mind of Blighty as these prelims are upon us. Enjoy the footy. We'll talk next week.
Thanks, Jared.
Malcolm Blight for the official AFL Select Footy Stars collector cards for serious collectors, big and small. Strategy 2021 as we delve into these two preliminary finals. Our McCafe catch-up with Craig Jennings. Add a McCafe coffee to your breakfast at Macca's. Jeno, welcome.
Good to be here, Jared. That Luke Beveridge interview, any coaches out there, he just is so open and gives great insights into strategy and how deep clubs dig into those final few minutes into a game of footy. Just an amazing interview. Great to listen to.
So let's have a listen to the close game scenarios planning as outlined by the Bulldogs coach.
We've been rehearsing some end-of-game scenarios too, and this game gave us an opportunity to do that all over again. And so in the pressure and the heat of the situation, you can look at what maybe you got right and a couple of things you could have done better. Yeah, and so it's more of a clinical microscope and probably I think we're extremely relieved, as I said after the game. Such a tight game and a point the difference at the end. We're well and truly aware that it could have gone either way, and we're really grateful to still be in the series.
And that's been your point for a couple of years around close game scenarios and how you need to live them, but also how you need to train them.
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example. Port Adelaide 6-0 this year in close games. They wouldn't be in their position without that. They would have been fighting out for 7th and 8th, and Melbourne get the week off the back of winning that round 23 game and getting a good set of finals. And do you want to talk about the last 2 minutes?
So you take the clinical look at it for us. Let's do the Dogs first.
Yeah, so I think what's important to note with the Bulldogs, and then after listening to Beveridge to really support this as well, is they lost a close game to Port 3 weeks ago. And what I talk about is even though when you're a supporter you lose those close games, it's just heart-wrenching and frustrating and disappointing. But the best clubs, they learn from those losses. And what you learn creates wins later on. And I think that's a perfect example on the weekend for Bulldogs. They lose a close game 3 weeks ago and it stands them in good stead in an all-important final. But also, I want you to think about when coaches talk about the basics and even Blighty talking about you don't have to win the game off your own boot. You don't need to be Superman. Don't need to do anything special. So if you go back to that last goal of the Bulldogs and think about the craft that goes into it and the basics and how many hours they would have trained that. And I want to talk about Mitch Hannon. It's very easy to focus on Bonce and Liberatore and all the stars of the game. But before Smith can kick that left foot goal, which is a story in itself, because I know Bob Murphy spoke about this earlier in the week, that Bevo is so strong on being able to use both sides of the body for these exact moments in a game. But if we talk about Mitch Hannon, so he comes to the club this year as a bit of a role player, but for Smith to get that ball, Mitch Hannon hits a ground ball at 100 miles an hour, hits it cleanly, and then feeds off a left-hand handball at speed. And that opens up the opportunity of Smith. And that's something that he would have put thousands of hours into in terms of his craft. And in terms of the strategy, that last behind that the Bulldogs are able to get to effectively win the game, it's really important to go back and have a look. It can be a little bit challenging on TV, but Hannon and Norton start together in the goal square. And as the ball comes inside 50, they go up towards the contest. And what that does for the Bulldogs, it opens up that goal line. And that's a really big factor. So if Norton and Hannon stay deep on that goal line, they also have a defender there and you can't rush that ball through. And those little strategies, and Bevo talked about the small margins in footy, you break those down and they have a big impact on your season.
Okay, what about the Lions side of the coin?
Well, it's interesting because the flip side for them is prior to this final, they only played in 2 close games for the whole season. and they were in rounds 2 and 3, and both of those were decided by a point. From memory, it's a long time ago. They lost the first one and won the second game.
They got dudded at Geelong.
That's right,
and then
with the tackle.
Zach Bailey after the siren against Collingwood.
Yeah, so if you think about that, even though they would have trained and rehearsed close game scenarios, they haven't been able to live it, and they haven't been able to live it or execute it recently. So I think that's an advantage. But often on this, we try and see it early here, Jared. Okay, so sometimes we'll say things and it won't be popular or people won't quite see it, but hopefully it comes to fruition. So Lincoln McCarthy, he's a big occasion player, this guy, in big moments. That doesn't mean you're like Dustin Martin winning Norm Smiths. We don't always get the opportunity to be part of grand final teams. But I've just noticed that when it counts, he always gets involved. And if you have a look at the last goal that Brisbane kicked to level the scores, he takes a contested mark in the midfield, but he knows the game state. So firstly, he brings Caleb Daniel up the field, who you feel comfortable with that you can outmark, as much as we love Caleb on this show. He outmarks him in the midfield. He gets a handball off really quickly. The ball goes inside 50, and then Zach Bailey gets a great one-on-one. So that's off the back of Lincoln McCarthy really putting himself in the game with a couple of minutes to go. And then on that last play, when they almost snatched this game, he gets it's the middle of the ground. He doesn't grab the footy. He just punches it forward 30 metres and he gives Cameron that perfect opportunity. Now, what I think that Brisbane, and now I think in context, Brisbane strategically have been really strong this year. Slow start with kicking stuff, but I've really liked their strategy. So, you know, on the weekend they had the Bulldogs are really superior in the middle of the ground. They had some great outside hits that took out. When you hit the ball to the outside, it takes away the opposition's midfield strength. So it was a great strategy. Late in the game, Harris Andrews goes forward, but they didn't wait till the last 2 minutes. So the win the game play, sometimes I think it's important to play them earlier. And he went forward with 8 or 10 minutes still on the clock, and they got some success out of that. But on their last stoppage, I just talked about opening up the goal square. And if you go back and have a look, their goal square's a little congested, so nobody's able to run into an open goal if they are able to win it. So, you know, they'll probably have a look at that last stoppage. What can they do different to try and open up? Because remember, late in games, often you get more stoppages because teams will play wider. They won't take risks. So there's some stuff that they'll have a look at over the summer in terms of their close game scenarios and stoppages, Jared.
Thanasia's text through. Craig, I was formerly a coach in C-grade Ammos. We came up against St Bede's when Bevo coached them. He took them up 3 grades. After a prelim loss to his side, we had a chat, and I learnt more about footy in 10 minutes than I had my whole previous career. The man is a superstar game day tactician.
I've been saying that for a few years now, Jared, that when I watch him or when I was in the coach's box with him, it was almost like he was coaching footy like it was still amateur football in a sense, that he just coached with such flair and creativity and freedom regardless of the outcome. And, you know, that's why they win a premiership and are in contention most years.
It is an emergency impromptu ringing of the trade bell because the trade is off. Lachie Neale has committed himself to stay at the Brisbane Lions. So after the wavering and the emergency meeting that was held on Monday and the to-ing and fro-ing within that meeting, Lachie Neale has gone away, spoken with his wife, pondered the future and decided to stay in Brisbane. Here he is speaking on the Lions website just a moment ago.
I'm committed and staying at the footy club, and as you said, it's been a whirlwind few days and everything's sort of gotten a little bit out of hand, but fully committed to the club and came in and told Fags and DD, Danny Daly and Swanee today that that's the case. So, so excited to be pushing on.
Could you just talk us through the last few days, how it's unfolded?
Yeah, well, clearly, as a lot of people know now, my wife's heavily pregnant. She's from WA. A lot of family and support network and friends and stuff in WA. But behind the scenes, we had a couple of conversations about how that looked moving forward. Obviously, with the COVID situation the last couple of years, it's been really hard for her to see her family and friends, as it has for a lot of people. And I've got a great support network in Perth as well. So we would half considering the prospect of getting back at some stage, but after sitting down and talking through it with our family and our friends and with the club, and without my management team, it became pretty clear after a couple of days that this is where the best place for us is to be at Brisbane. Firstly, for my footy, and secondly, we believe we can get the support network around us that we need moving forward. So we know it's challenging times for everyone with COVID, and we're no different. We're human, and probably got played out a little bit sooner and earlier than what we thought. We hadn't put that amount of thought into it, and it sort of got blown out of proportion a bit. And now we've made that decision. We're really happy and can't wait to get stuck into next year now.
So, with all the scrutiny, a lot of social media, can you tell me how you're feeling? Are you going okay?
Yeah, all good. Yeah, it's it has been a little bit rough, some of the stuff, and in the media, and there's obviously always going to be social media attached, but I feel like we've done a great job in avoiding a lot of that stuff. But it probably has taken its toll a little bit. I'm pretty weary and tired at the moment, but super excited about what the future holds for both of us, and we've got a beautiful baby girl on the way in 4 weeks, so we've got a lot to look forward to.
So you're still aligned. What's the future? How do you picture the future for you at our footy club now?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest things as well is I've got unfinished business here. I want to be holding up a cup in a Lions jersey, and that's what I'll be working towards over the next couple of years. And super excited to be here and can't wait to get going again next year.
That has been tumultuous. What a tumultuous 3 or 4 days that has been for Lachie Neale and for his family, and then for the Lions. So Craig Jennings is here. Just a quick thought on the trade bell. How big is this for Brisbane?
Well, when I heard it, I clapped just instinctively, and he's just such an asset both on and off field. I had a personal experience with my son that met him, and he was just so great with his time and caring, and my son became a Brisbane supporter off the back of that. So just amazing impact. It says a lot about Chris Fagan and what he set up there. I love the unfinished business conversation, and it's important to remember before people choose to smash players for some of around some of these things, we do preach at AFL clubs family first. And Jared, once you've had kids, it really does change your thinking and all those kind of things. But what a great result for Brisbane and Lachie, and all the best in the future.
How big's the sigh of relief for Chris Fagan, who for a couple of days is thinking, right, how do we cover that hole?
Yeah, so you really you get a little pragmatic. So once a decision is made, then it's down to business, and you are looking at filling that hole either with one players or through a combination, how you come out of it best. But ultimately, this is just such reinforcement for what Fagan's building up there, and Danny Daly and the whole coaching team, footy department, because, as Leper has taught us, it's all about the club. High performance is more than the coach in a sense, but it's just, the players be excited, and it can really, drive their pre-season. I think it's just an enormous result.
Impromptu ringing of the trade bells are quite thrilling, really. Lachie Neale is staying at the Brisbane Lions. Let's return to Strategy 2021. Geno, Port Adelaide and the Western Bulldogs is where you're going to start. Came down to the last kick in round 23. Where did Port get an advantage?
It was interesting listening to Bevo, wasn't it? Really changing the narrative of that game, because we think, Port are the victors in a sense, but he's really changed the narrative that, it was only a 2-point game, and they were heading that game for a long period, all but about 7 minutes, I think. But when we break it down, so what we do know about Port, that we've said a lot on this program, Jared, on this segment, is Port have some high-value target stats, and they start with the centre bounce numbers, contested possession, and clearance. So if we think about those three, I think the risk for the Bulldogs is the centre bounce stuff. So what we just saw on the weekend in the Bulldogs-Brisbane game, the Brisbane tactics to try and exploit the Bulldogs' strength in the midfield, knock the ball to the outside, and part of that is trying to get the ball inside 50 into a defence of the Bulldogs that you think you can get them one-on-one. So I think that's the risk for the Bulldogs. It's not a flaw in their game, but it's the number one thing on the Port Adelaide whiteboard. It's the thing they'll target. And you just get great benefits for your strategies, whether that's at the Gabba or whether that's in Adelaide. So there will be a lot of time spent on that. So that's the risk for the Bulldogs. They'll need to have a plan A and plan B, high focus area for Port Adelaide. But I want to also acknowledge that the Bulldogs' defence is not weak by any point, so they do get mids and wings back to support in game or in general play. I just think that they've held on really strongly all year. But the centre bounce stuff, if you get a look at them one-on-one, I think you can sell to your team that it's a big advantage for you, so it comes down to centre bounce as an advantage for Port potentially.
Where do the Dogs find an advantage?
So I want you to listen to Luke Beveridge, post-game, pre-game. He'll talk about the numbers game. He's been talking about this for the 4 or 5 years he's been coaching. He's not talking about stats, Jared. He's talking about adjusting numbers around the footy and behind the footy. So we know you can play with a 6-6-6 setup. You can play with 5 forwards, 6 mids, add a forward into the mid. So now it's a 5 forwards, 7 mids effectively, 6 defenders. Or you can play with 5 forwards, 6 mids and 7 defenders, and you're adjusting the numbers all the time. And then you heard in your interview earlier today where you're moving players a metre here and a metre there, and that can also change the look. So I think the Dogs' advantage is Bevo has got such a great feel of the numbers game, where he needs to adjust, where he needs to put the spare numbers, the positioning of that spare number. So as an example, a really clear one that will come up most weeks, if Port Adelaide have a forward that goes up to a contest or a stoppage, and they're a contest team, so they like to have an extra number there. Now, what Bevo can do, he can effectively follow that player and the numbers stay even, or he can pull a player back, keep a defender back. So the numbers game for Bevo at the time is the Port Adelaide have a +1 at the stoppage, but Bevo gets a +1 in defence, and it helps support his defence. But he can do 2 things with that. He can make it Caleb Daniel, who can just sit off the back of a stoppage there. And I call them stoppage specialists, Jared, because he can read that stoppage and impact in an attacking manner as well as defensive. Or he can make it Easton Wood and defend a little bit deeper with that number. And, you know, that's the advantage for the Bulldogs in a sense, the way Bevo reads those numbers. And if the spare is Caleb Daniel, we know how great he is at impacting a game. So for me, that could be an advantage for the Bulldogs, the numbers game. Not stats, but where he places his spare players, Jared.
You've always taught us, look at the game, the look of the game at the start. Whose type of game does it look like? If Port holds sway early, what are we looking for?
So often in the first 2 or 3 minutes, we'll talk, Jared, and I'll say, this looks like when this team wins and this looks like when this team loses. It doesn't mean that gets 100% a result, but what it does mean, if you're in the coach's box and it doesn't look right, you can manipulate things in terms of the numbers game or your messaging to change the look of the game. Now, if it looks right early, you don't touch the game. So something you can look at to know that if Port are on top early. Now, what we know about the Bulldogs is their midfield depth is a real super strength of those. So Port can do 2 things to turn that strength into a weakness, and you will see it early. The first thing you can do, and teams have had success with this, is tag Liberatore. Okay, so Drew from Port Adelaide can do that job. So that's something that could change the look of the game in Port's favour early. And the other part you can do is crowd the Dogs at stoppages. So when they were a little out of form late in the season, what teams were doing was, one, they were tagging Liberatore, but just owning the outside of the contest or the stoppage area. And what that looks like is the opposition put a forward up, the wingers in a little bit tight, the halfback can come up towards the stoppage as well, and it just looks crowded. So when you think of the Bulldogs and that midfield super strength, they get the handball out. So Liberatore feeds it out to Bontempelli. It goes out to Hunter. It goes out to McRae. He's in the chain there somewhere, Jared. And then they go inside 50. So if Port are looking right early, those handballs will be getting picked off and getting smashed in tackles. And the advantage for Port turning the Bulldogs' strength into a weakness is Port have big bodies. So what that will look like is those big bodies smashing the receiver. Every time Bulldogs handball the ball, that receiver gets smashed. What happens then? The ball hits the deck. Port Adelaide run onto that footy and they get it forward fast and quickly. And it'll go inside 30. So remember, we talk a lot. I'm not interested in the inside 50 count. It's the inside 30 count. They'll get those deep entries. You probably see Dixon on the end of it, goes to ground. You've got those 4 or 5 great Port Adelaide crummers.
And if it looks like a Bulldogs game, what will be the markers?
Yeah, so for me, the last 2 games, and Bevo referenced this again, I love this interview, Jared. 3rd time I've said it. They got the fast start against Port, so they got the lead early. I think it was 4 or 5 goals in the middle of the year.
4-0.
Yeah, and Bevo referenced that, and that is a highlight that we take everything into account. So yes, some games are more important than others. Yes, the finals is a different series, but you can take themes and ideas and strategies from games even a year or two before. They can follow through. So simply when you think about Port Adelaide, they play a very high and flat defence. So you think about a forward half turnover team, a territory team. I talk about the inside 30. They want to get it right to their goal square and absolutely lock it in. But if Bulldogs are on top, what you'll see is somebody like Caleb Daniel. He'll win the footy and he'll just penetrate that defence, and the ball will get out the back of that very high and flat Port Adelaide defence, and you'll see Hunter, Hannon, Smith, and wish it was Waitman as well, racing to goal. And what that will create is goals close to goal. So you'll see them running into the goal line effectively, improves your accuracy. And, I keep thinking about McRae. So Caleb Daniel will be involved, and McRae will probably be in there somewhere too on his way to 40 possessions, Jared. But you think about Caleb Daniel, they've actually got set plays from that back half now where the Bulldogs forwards get high. They'll be up against the Port Adelaide flat defence, and they've got a set play. Caleb Daniel just penetrates that defence, so that's what it'll look like early for the Dogs if they're on top.
The beautiful part of strategy for the preliminary finals is that we have recent case studies from round 23 on both fronts. So Melbourne and Geelong, Craig Jennings, is when they go back and study it, what do they learn most from the game? So we'll start with Geelong. What does Geelong learn?
So definitely they learn a little bit about that last play. I think there's some stuff that they did with Gorney that Stanley will have confidence. So you think about Max Gawn, he's an elite cross-country runner. And Stanley, and I heard Nick Rewalt talk about this on your show, that Stanley has got that ability to run with Gawn. And that's a big factor because it takes away Gorney's strength. And footy is often about how can you turn an opposition strength into a weakness. So, but you know how highly I rate Ruckman and Gorney, Jared. But I was just thinking about that game and going back having a look. One of the turning points after halftime for Melbourne was when a Geelong forward went up to the contest or the stoppage, Christian Salem just dropped off and was now a spare defender. But what that looks like, he might be on his own, but sometimes he then attracts another Geelong forward to go up and man him up, and then that allows Lever to be free, and you get this concertina effect. But importantly, now we've been talking on this show for years around Christian Salem and how important he is to Melbourne because of his ball use. And I just thought in that game, once Salem was able to free up, he was able to set up Melbourne's ball movement. And at that point of the game, it's not about stopping Geelong scoring. You need to hit the scoreboard yourself to make up that margin. And you think about Christian Salem, he's just not really a player you give time and space to. So I expect him to cop some heavy buffering this week.
And what does Melbourne learn about Geelong?
Yeah, it was interesting because when you ask that question straight away, it's more about what Melbourne learn about Melbourne than what they learn about Geelong. Now, somebody called me biased on Melbourne. You listen to what I say about Melbourne last year. I thought they were very poor. See it early, Jared. Okay, so they just look right to me all year. And the bias in terms of Melbourne is I love their game style. That more chaotic, direct, really hard tackling and physical team. That's my coaching philosophy in a sense. They're the teams that I love. But what I noticed about that game or thinking about it is the belief for Melbourne they get about themselves. And you talked about they're carrying that history on their shoulders, Jared. So a lot of this season's about can they get the wins that give them the belief and at what point of the season, and that snowballs. So what they learn about Geelong, and when they played Brisbane early in the year, they can come from a long way back and win games. That's pretty critical. They're 3 or 4 goals down at three-quarter time. They still believe they can win the game. And also importantly, the close game stuff. They've been executing this for 5 and 6 years, both on the training track, in games, and in the classroom in a sense. And it all comes back to being 5 goals up at Cardinia Park, I'm going to call it, because I never know what it's called anymore. 5 goals up at three-quarter time against Geelong and losing the game was so painful, really studied the close game scenarios. And so I think that they just get so much belief, no matter the scoreboard, that they can win the game.
You love the strength versus strength idea and when they collide and what holds sway. So in this game, what does it look like?
So I want to break this game down differently. When you're watching it on TV and strengths are colliding, and I'm very visual, Jared, and I think about Rocky IV and the gloves coming. And so both teams have strengths and which strength will come out on top. And in this case, I'm not talking about chaos versus control. I want you to have a think about a Geelong strength, and that's their ability to fight through tackles. And when they fight through tackles, what happens is they get through the front of a contest or a stoppage. They break that first line of defence, and then what happens? They can kick it inside 50 with some great targets. Hawkins, Rowan, Cameron, Radicalea down there now as well. Front half firepower. And the best example of that for the Geelong supporters is when they beat Richmond post-game. This is early in the season when we think Richmond are still going to be a great team. Post-game, Damien Hardwick referenced it. Geelong are competition best at breaking through tackles. That's their strength. See that on the weekend. But a Melbourne strength is pressure and tackling. So can Geelong, their strength of breaking through tackles, getting through the front of the contest, creating a score for their forward firepower, when Melbourne's strength is tackling and pressure? The Melbourne whiteboard, we mentioned it very early in the season. I haven't spoke about whiteboards for a while, Jared. I'm happy to bring it up again. Blitz to score and lock it in. So what blitz means, NFL term, something Lepers told us off air, might have been off air, on air as well. The blitz NFL term, something they used at Richmond. And what that means is when the opposition have the footy, you win it back, and you win it back fast, and you take the ball forward. So which of these two strengths come out on top? Geelong's ability to fight through tackles, and then when they fought through tackles, a good look inside 50, or they might choose to go into that control game, but it all starts fighting through tackles, or Melbourne's strength of that brutal blitz footy. I can't wait for this one, Jared.
So the final step in every strategy session is to put a theme around a game, and you're going to put it around Melbourne and Geelong.
So very quickly, I've got to thank John Sainsbury, famous book dealer. He sent me in lockdown, feeling for me, sent me a couple of books. One was Andre Agassi, because he'd heard the show and the reference to Melbourne and their Agassi theme this year, and a Muhammad Ali book from the 70s. It's a beautiful hardcover book. So my theme is Melbourne, they're easy. They're Andre Agassi. So one of his ideas is that you don't have to be the best player in the world on that day against that opponent. In Melbourne's context, they don't need to be the best team in the world on the weekend. They just have to be better than their opponent on the day. And that sort of talks around their ability to reset. And if you think about tennis, something that I've been trying to get involved in as much as I can the last 2 years, that mindset, the stress of watching tennis where every point just is so critical, okay, that ability just to focus on one point at a time. So you see that in Melbourne in terms of that contest-to-contest focus. If you lose that contest, you win the next one. Things aren't going well now, we reset. And it's been phenomenal for Melbourne this year. And then there was another thing that popped up out of that book. Agassi, famously trained on Christmas Day because his opponents didn't.
Yes.
And I was just thinking, if Melbourne win this week, it's going to feel like Christmas Day for Melbourne supporters. And then Geelong, very quickly, they're Muhammad Ali. They've been great for a long time. They won big titles when they were underdogs. They're underdogs this weekend. He won big titles in his 30s. The Geelong team, highly experienced, a lot of players in their 30s. But what's interesting when I had a look through this book, Ali famously changed strategies to beat different opponents. And he had the Foreman rope-a-dope strategy. And when I talk about Chris Scott, the Chameleon Cats, the Cats are competition best. Chris Scott is the best coach match day in the competition at taking away an opposition strength. So I talk about their control game, but they can very effectively play a chaos game. So dial up, dial down. I think when they play 100% control or do it against bottom teams, they'll beat the bottom teams with that mode, but 100% control in finals probably brings them undone. But they dialed it down last week, whereas more like 60% control, 40%, that chaos game. Can't wait for this one, Jared.
Good on you, Geno. So Agassi versus Ali, the theme for Melbourne versus Geelong. That's Strategy 2021. Daisy Pearce is under house arrest in Perth. No, she started her 14 days quarantine to be part of the grand final broadcast with Channel 7. Days, welcome.
Good morning or afternoon or whatever time it is where you are, Jared. Thanks for joining. Thanks for having me.
Have you gone into the twilight zone yet?
It's early days, but I'm already sensing that it could get ugly and weird and wonderful in my own company over the next 14 days. But I think with 2.5-year-old twins, I'm owed at least 2 weeks worth of sleep. Yes. So if you ask me what I'm going to do to entertain myself, my answer will not be very interesting.
Bank as much sleep to erase the deficit as possible. How What is the setup? How are you being tracked to make sure that you're doing the right thing? Ankle bracelet?
Yeah, the process has been a big one. And I'll say first and foremost, it is such a privilege to be here. I know there'd be plenty of Geelong and Melbourne supporters who would love to have been able to make the journey, and I'm sure explored every option. But the process to get here is pretty full on. I mean, exemptions and that kind of thing, granted, because I will be a part of the broadcast at the back end for grand final day, and then had to get COVID tested within 48 hours of leaving, COVID tested on arrival at the airport, transferred to my accommodation, and now I have to stay in the building for the next 14 days. I'm tracked on an app where it's a good little system, actually. A number of times a day I get an alert. I have to take a selfie where I am, and it pings me to my location, and my face is verified at their end. So,
Yes.
it's pretty involved, but worth it in the end to be here on grand final day for what should be a great day. And as I said off the top, just feeling really privileged to get the opportunity.
Let's have a play with these prelims, shall we, Days? We'll do the Bulldog. The Bulldogs is our theme today, with Luke Beveridge joining us, and he is glass half full on Marcus Bontempelli, but there's still a little bit to happen for that to be the case. How these decisions are big, and we've seen them break both ways. What's the balance in your mind?
Oh, they're tough. They're tough calls. I lost sleep over the Bontempelli reaction on the siren last week. I mean, it was such a good win, and his reaction on the bench, it was just empty and unbefitting of the result. So straight away, my body language radar was going off, and I worried. Hopefully, the scan results come through and that alleviates some of his stress. But he would have spent, I don't know, there's been about 100 hours since the siren went on Saturday night to send them through to a prelim, and he would have spent, I reckon, from personal experience, maybe 80 of those thinking about it, and a good 30 of those in a machine called a Game Ready, which is this recovery device. It pumps up and kind of pumps iced water onto your leg and applies compression. So he would have been living in that thing. And spending many, many hours and minutes thinking about it. So it plays on your mind regardless of the decision they make. It's a big thing that would have played on his mind in the build-up. I mean, if there's no structural damage, given the importance of him, not just as a player, but a leader, and the possibility that he can go forward, you can imagine, and then hearing to Beveridge chatting to you, then you'd imagine they'd take the risk. I also... The medical sub gives you a little bit of a buffer, a little bit of room for error, which that buffer could be well and truly evaporated within minutes if someone else goes down as well. But it doesn't sound like one of those things that is going to go and him not be able to compete at all. It might be just a matter of playing in pain. So I think he'll play, but it'll be a watch the whole time. And regardless, it'll be a big psychological challenge for him, navigating the week, his own emotions, and then getting through a big game.
Yeah, yep.
And then the other side of it, Jerry, sorry to jump in, is that if you're Port Adelaide and he plays, this will sound a bit not dirty, but I'd be sending Willem Drew to him, not to do anything untoward, but just to make sure everything he does is hard, given that he's such an important player and their leader, and that his teammates would be so aware and sensitive to all his movements and how he's feeling every day. They're living in quarantine together. You send someone to their captain to make sure everyone knows it's just going to be hard for him.
Yep.
Drew doesn't have to do anything he doesn't normally do, but that's where my attention would be going.
Oh, you do have a coach's mind, that's for sure, Days. You have a coach's mind. The Alir factor and how the Dogs plot around that, and they have had a cider at it in round 23.
It's an interesting one because they did a pretty good job with him back in round 23, and it was the night where for the first, it was a bit of a shift from what they'd done previously, and English played predominantly as a forward for the majority of the game, and Lewis Young in the ruck. But that was a night where Norton could spend some time on him to engage him and make him accountable. English when he was the deepest. But with Waitman out as well, I just wonder how the dynamic shifts when you take away such a scoring power in Waitman. Can they afford to have, say, a Norton tied up, concerning himself too much with the job that he needs to do on Aaliyah. So it's an interesting one. The one that comes into the side that wasn't there in round 23 was the unused medical sub, is Josh Shackey, who could be a big factor in this game. And straight away, my mind drifts to Tom Boyd's performance in the grand final back in 2016, another big name, pretty high profile recruit that had been traded across and played the game of his life in a grand final. Well, you just sit here and wonder, does Josh Shackey do that? He's been had such an interesting career, and he's someone that I find myself cheering for. I want him to succeed, and it's been such a winding journey for him. Even this year, I mean, there was a game back, I think it was Richmond in round 7, where you thought, is that the last time that they try him? Because he just didn't look at the level. And then he went away, was in the VFL for a long time after that, and then found his way back in as a defender. Then really important in moments late last week against the Lions. So he plays a big role. I mean, does he go down and put some time into Aaliyah as an option to free up Norton so that you do have that genuine scoring power that they're going to need?
Yep. That's a great strategic piece. Tomorrow night, Melbourne and Geelong. So the D's backs versus the Cats forward are occupying many a mind. Is that where yours goes?
It does. It was such an important kind of part of the game last time they met. And again, back in round 23, it's so good having recent form for both of these games. But I mean, that was a night where when in that second quarter, when Geelong really got on top, particularly out of centre bounce where you get the one-on-ones, they found it hard to contain the three big forwards, Hawkins, Cameron and Rowan. And then the Melbourne defenders were able to fight back late, May and Lever in particular. But the change in dynamic again in this game is that now Asava Radaglia is in this side. So it's another tool that they have to contend with. And you think that with Asava's strengths, his physicality, his ability to launch and fly at the ball, he could play a somewhat, not a defensive role. I know Chris Scott bit back at that during the week and said, no, we'll make sure they're worrying about our forwards. So, but I can see that as a matchup where he tries to find himself near Lever as much as possible and just crash into him in the air. And it's something that changes the way the backs will have to operate against that forward line. Joel Smith obviously comes out of the side as well, and it's sounding like a Michael Hibberd, a really experienced defender, comes in, which is not a bad replacement, and the beauty of being pretty healthy and with good depth at this time of the year.
And Stanley and Gawn. So it is one of those matches where the ruck will play such a pivotal role.
It is. And again, such a great example a couple of weeks ago. So we've got the rematch now. And I watched this game back. It's one of the first things I did when I got here into quarantine. But isn't it funny, Jared, how the storytelling in sport, just things get lost in the result? Because it was a game where Stanley was actually very, very good for big parts of this game. I mean, the history will say Max Gawn kicks the winner after the siren and why didn't Stanley defend him and all of that kind of thing. But Stanley did so much right in this game. He was markedly physical and aggressive with the way that he jumped at Gawn and up and over him at times. And then he really was able to get back and help his defence a number of times. That second quarter where Geelong eventually broke the damn wall a bit and piled on all those scores. The first 8 or so minutes, Melbourne actually dominated and peppered the goals. And if not for Reece Stanley getting back to help out defensively, it may have been Melbourne that kind of kicked away. But Stanley sort of hung them in there. And I love those moments in sport where momentum is against the side and they always get lost, these little moments. But what do you do to limit the damage in those moments? Those things are often what helps to flick the momentum back your way. And I think Reece Stanley was a big part of that in this game back in round 23. And they go again. One thing's for sure, though, is that it won't be Reece Stanley's job to both man the goal line and Max Gawn. Yes. If there's a slow play coming inside 50. I feel like that was a lesson not just for the Cats, but the entire competition. Yes. Because it wasn't a play necessarily out of the very back pages of Melbourne's playbook.
Don't get beaten by what you've seen before. Daisy, it's great to have you on a Thursday, so we'll have a proper chat next week once you're all settled, and we'll check in on your sanity 8 days into your lockdown.
Yeah, no guarantees what you get next week, Jared.
Good on you. Daisy Pearce, who's taken up in Perth and gone through the quarantine vaccine process. Yesterday, we debated the merits of Australia and Afghanistan meeting in a test match in late November in Hobart. Cricket Australia told us it was waiting to learn more, both internationally and locally, and we did learn more as yesterday went on. The Taliban confirmed a ban on women playing sports under the regime now in Afghanistan, and Australia's government provided some clarity last night. So I'm indebted to the Federal Sports Minister, Senator Richard Colbeck, for his time this morning. Minister, welcome back to the program.
Morning, Jared.
Does Australia condemn the Taliban ban on women playing sport in Afghanistan?
Well, we've made a very clear statement, as you've indicated overnight. We don't support excluding women from sport at any level. Simply unacceptable. So we're really concerned about the reports that came out last night. We've been in very productive conversations with Cricket Australia. Our perspective, I know, has been passed through to the ICC, and of course we've also urged the ICC and other global sporting authorities to take a stand against this if in fact this is the case. So we'll be using our channels to confirm what's been reported in the media yesterday, but it's just not acceptable that women are excluded from sport.
Is that stand, Minister, that the ICC should revoke Afghanistan's status as a member nation?
Well, my understanding of their rules is that to be a member, they must have a women's program, a full women's program. And so if they don't, I don't see how they can continue to be a part of the ICC process. Now, this is tragic for all those great cricketers coming out of Afghanistan, and we've celebrated them as part of Big Bash and other forums as well. And I think it's only recently that their women's teams gained test status, but not had the opportunity to play a game. It's deeply concerning that the Taliban have taken this approach.
So what advice have you given Cricket Australia around the Hobart test in late November?
Well, effectively, we've been talking through the issues. Well, I think we're pretty much on the same page in respect of our view that excluding women from sport at any level is unacceptable. Cricket Australia's got a fantastic record of developing the game. We've got the Indian women's team here at the moment in isolation, ready to start a series very soon. We were extremely proud to host the T20 Women's World Cup here last year. Very lucky to get the final in at the MCG just before sport was more broadly impacted by COVID. But so we're on the same page in respect of that. I don't expect to be in a different situation from their point of view as this goes forward. I understand they're discussing the issue, or have been overnight and this morning, and they'll be making a statement during the day. And I don't expect that there'll be a sliver between us.
Is it difficult to see Australia playing Afghanistan in that test match?
Well, it's not just about the test match, Jared. I mean, we have the World Cup coming up, the T20 World Cup. Afghanistan have qualified for that T20 World Cup next month. So the ICC really does need to take a close look at this, and quickly. They haven't necessarily been fast in their actions in the past. We also have a triangular against Afghanistan and the West Indies, hosted in the UAE by Afghanistan prior to the T20 World Cup. So it's not just about that, about the test match. Obviously that's what we're focusing on because it's here at home. But all of these things are sanctioned by the ICC. They're the governing body for all of these events, particularly the T20 World Cup that's coming up, and they need to clarify exactly what it is that the Taliban have been reported as saying, and then they need to take the appropriate action. If their rules say that you need to have a full women's program to be a participant, be a member, then they need to be following their rules. And as tragic as that is for the Afghani athletes, we've also said that we will welcome any individual sportswomen and men of Afghanistan here in the country, but not under the Taliban flag.
So how does that look, Minister? So in an Olympic forum, there's been a refugee Olympic team, for instance. How can you offer a way to play sport for Afghani athletes who would be denied that by their government?
Well, look, I think it's a really good question. We're sort of just learning about where the Taliban look like they're going. We were all watching with great anticipation some of their early comments about what they said that they were going to do in the lead up to recent events. We're now finding out what they're actually going to do, and that's going to shape these sorts of things. And the 5 athletes who participated, for example, in the Big Bash last year, we all celebrated, loved watching them play and loved having them here. We'd like to be able to see that continue, and so we need to work with, I think, the international sporting authorities and our own NSOs here at home in Australia to see how we can make that work. We know, for example, that some athletes have found a way to leave the country and are seeking refuge in other places, so we may see them playing sport under a different flag, for example. So I think it's a bit early to have all of this nailed down at this point in time, but there are a lot of people involved here. There's some very, very good people in the administration of cricket in Afghanistan. To think that it's only a decade, really, over the last decade they've started to come in to international cricket to see where they are, to have someone like Rashid Khan, who's ranked at number 3 in the world in T20 bowling, is an extraordinary demonstration of what they've been able to achieve. And we want to be able to support the athletes, but our issue is the stance of the Taliban.
So you couldn't have a national Afghanistan team playing under that flag against an Australian team in the short term. Would that be a fair interpretation?
Look, I think you'd find it extremely difficult because they don't have all of the elements that we value when you're prohibiting women from playing sport. I don't see how you can make that occur. It's an extremely difficult, complex circumstance, and it's something that I think we're all going to have to work our way through, and we'll obviously be having conversations with other jurisdictions about this. We all love and want to promote sport and support athletes, and you saw some of the reports that came out during the time of people leaving Afghanistan prior to the end of the evacuation that was being conducted. I think there's a fair bit to play out yet.
Yeah, deeply troubling. So, Minister, what are the differences? What makes this different to other regimes that we would regard as oppressive that sporting contests have continued with?
Well, look, I think it's we're still learning that, and I've given some thought to that over the last 24 hours or so as this has started to pull together, and there are some quite oppressive regimes around the world, and we're going to have to work our way through this situation and the circumstances that we find ourselves in, but a lot of this is still very, very raw for a lot of people. I was talking to the Tasmanian Premier last night, who's been in direct conversations with the local Afghani community, and they're just extremely concerned about the prospect of the game, for example, because everything that they've been through so recently. I was talking to some of my parliamentary colleagues, including some who have served in Afghanistan. They are extremely concerned about this. So it's all very fresh for a lot of people. And so we need to deal with all of those issues, but also work our way through the broader international and diplomatic things. It's not going to be a simple exercise. This is a very, very complex nation, circumstance, and so there's a lot to play out at this point in time. But based on the reports that we've received overnight with respect to permitting women to play sport, we thought that we needed to be unequivocal as to our acceptance of that stance. That's why we've said the things that we've said. But we need to continue to work with all of the particularly the international sporting authorities and bodies, to work our way through this, and it's going to take some time, I think. But initially, we can't accept the stance that you can exclude women from sport at any level. It's just unacceptable.
So, Minister, we were pondering yesterday, there's politics and there's diplomacy and then there's the moral stance. Does your statement and your conversations with Cricket Australia essentially represent the moral stance?
Well, look, I mean, a lot of these things work together. You can't necessarily separate them all out. They all impinge on each other at certain points. But we simply don't accept the exclusion of women from sport. That it is simply unacceptable. That's our perspective. So that's the point where we are at right now. We're in very close contact with Cricket Australia on a pretty regular basis over the last 24 hours. Yep. We'll continue that. We know that our perspective as a government has been passed through to the ICC. We asked for that to occur. And we'll be talking to some of our international colleagues, other jurisdictions, my counterparts in other countries, because we need to work on all this together. It's an extremely complex and difficult circumstance, and for a lot of people, it's all very fresh, and so we need to manage all of those things together. And it's not simple. There might be requests for a simple, definitive answer on some of these things, but unfortunately, for some elements of it, there aren't.
Minister, just as we finish, the prospect of Ashes crowds in the conversation of yesterday, could you see a vaccine passport being required for cricket fans to be able to go and attend the Ashes this summer?
Well, that may be the case. That may be something that the states decide that they will have as a condition of allowing crowds to occur under their public health response. It may be something that the sports themselves decide that they need to have. So the work that's being done at the moment is to support those things should they be decided. But it certainly is something that I can see, particularly some of the states looking at. I think that we're going to get very, very high rates of vaccination. If you look at the first dose numbers across the country, they're very high, over 70s, close to 90%, over 50s, well into the 80s. So I think that we're going to get very high vaccination rates anyway, which is great because that will protect us all. And we all want to see sport returning to something like normal, as we want to see the rest of our lives returning to something like normal. Yep. And it's been a very difficult couple of years for the major codes, and for them to get to where they've got to with respect to being at this stage of the season and on the verge of the big day of the year. It has been quite a feat, and I commend them for their efforts in doing that.
Minister, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jared. Federal
Sports Minister, Senator Richard Colbeck. I think reading between the lines, Australia won't play Afghanistan in formal sport, while the attitude of the Taliban is that the women's program is banned.